If you're in London, good evening and happy International Ninja Day. Welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown for today, December 5th, 2018. We meet each week to talk a little bit about IT news, IT enterprise news, and potentially something about cryptocurrency. I'm your host, Tom Hollingsworth, and I am joined today by the recently returned from Las Vegas, Ken Nalbone. Ken, how are you?
I'm good. I made it back alive. So anytime you return from Vegas, in good shape is a good time. Good one.
Pretty much. Alive, awake, and no warrants out for your arrest. That's how I
None.
like to leave Vegas. All right. Well, we've got a jam-packed show today, so we're going to jump right into it. We're actually going to start out talking about AWS reInvent. You probably heard about it last week, and if you were following along with the news, you probably spent all weekend trying to unbury yourself from the mountain of product announcements that were made. Now, Ken, you were actually there. You got to see all this great stuff live and in person.
That's
What
right.
are some of the thoughts you brought away from it?
Well, I thought it was interesting to see, for starters, during his keynote, Andy Jassy basically acknowledged the existence of AWS's competition. I don't think I can remember the last time they did that, but of course it was to highlight how big of a lead they have in the cloud war. But with that in mind, if you think AWS just has a ticket they're writing down easy street now and they're not going to worry about it, think again. They are clearly stepping on the gas. There were all kinds of announcements that you mentioned. I'm not going to go through them all, of course, but there are the ones typically that you'd expect out of a cloud company. New machine learning services and analytics, new EC2 instance types, including based on a new ARM processor called Graviton. They're open sourcing Firecracker, which is what runs the back end of Lambda and makes for super fast provisioning of VMs and containers. Now, that's all great. AWS has come a long way in the hearts of developers. They basically have them in the palm of their hands. But many of the enterprises that we focus on, they've been kind of slow to adopt the public cloud. And it seems like AWS is starting to make more moves to bring the enterprises into the cloud now. That's the impression I came away with at reInvent. There were announcements like Outpost, for example. That'll be a big one in the enterprise. It can truly now provision a hybrid cloud with a single management plane. It's going to be the AWS dashboard or the VMware Cloud on AWS dashboard, depending on which flavor they pick. And then, of course, there's things like Glacier Deep Archive. Huge for the enterprises. They're storing tons and tons of data for very long times on tape, and they can finally get out of that game. It's probably a take back service, but now the enterprise doesn't have to worry about it. It's somebody else's job. That's what you pay for a cloud service for, so that you have less of the day-to-day worries on your hands and other things like that.
I thought the VMware announcement was enormous. Basically, we're getting AWS on-prem, and Pat Gelsinger basically walked on stage to sound the death toll for anybody who's not embracing AWS when it comes into your enterprise. How was that received by people?
It's kind of interesting because, well, Dell owns VMware, right? But it doesn't sound like the hardware being delivered by AWS with VMware software is necessarily going to be Dell. So it had people scratching their heads a bit. What's this going to do for all those OEM server makers that were trying to maintain their foothold in the data center? I'm not sure. It doesn't even have to be VMware. That's the interesting thing. So, you can have some EC2 native flavor of this Outpost in your data center as well. So that I thought that was interesting. And I thought a lot of people are kind of wondering, what was that going to mean for VMware themselves, even though they're partnering with AWS very closely these days? Are we going to start seeing that disappear on-prem as people just adopt AWS everywhere, private cloud, public cloud, both? That'll be interesting to watch.
So what's your big announcement? What's your big takeaway from AWS reInvent 2019? What's the big story going to be?
My biggest one, well, this isn't really a story, but my feeling was they've done a great job to cultivate a community around the developers at AWS. They love that. I feel like they're not doing as much to cultivate a community of infrastructure professionals, which is huge if they're trying to get a larger foothold in the enterprise. If you're not there to code and talk about coding and participate in coding events, there isn't much for you to do like there is in a normal conference where they have some kind of socialization space where the bloggers can hang out or you can chat with your peers. It would be nice to see that at future reInvents, basically to cultivate a community for the enterprise the way they have done for the developers. But the big takeaway is that they're trying to AWS is becoming friendlier with the enterprise, and I think we'll see more of that in the future as they basically expand their foothold.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good plan. Thank you for going out there and covering that for the Gestalt IT Rundown. We really appreciate it, and we're glad that you survived.
My pleasure. Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, if you have been paying attention to your IT news of the week and you are subscribed to itecal.net, which is a service that we offer you to figure out what's going on in the IT world, you probably know that KubeCon is next week. However, this week we're crossing the Rubicon with the first big security flaw in Kubernetes. Darren Shepard, who is a member of Rancher Labs, discovered the first major flaw, which is, I hope you had this in the pool, privilege escalation. It allows a user to gain full admin access to any compute node in a Kubernetes cluster because of the API used in the flaw. Any users on the cluster are allowed to perform the call that allows for this escalation. Oops. This flaw also doesn't show up as an unauthorized request, because why would it? And it appears as a normal call in the server log, so it's pretty much going to be unknown if you've ever exploited this in the wild, because everything looks normal. Patches are already available for versions 1.10.11 and newer. Really bad bug, but it also kind of shows you that open source works, because I don't think people would have found this if this had been a closed source program like Docker. Ken,
exactly.
What is the huge impact of this that now we know that Kubernetes is not immune from having things as simple as privilege escalation bugs?
I mean, it's not a surprise, right? It's not going to be, as you mentioned, it's not the first popular open source project with a serious flaw, Heartbleed for anyone, for example. And there's already a fix, but you got to update Kubernetes. Well, yeah, that's hard at this point. We're in the product lifecycle where not everybody knows the platform really well. So if you're really good at Kubernetes, it's time to become a consultant and start, churning out those SOWs for upgrades for your clients. But, would someone have found it and crafted an exploit before the patch was released if Kubernetes was closed source? Maybe. It's far likelier that, it would have taken longer for this patch to come to light. So you're right. I mean, open source works. With all those eyes from the community on the source code, it's more likely that we're going to see something like this brought to people's attention. And before somebody else tries to get a hold of it for nefarious means, communities around open source projects are large enough that you see, the former of those two options happen more often. So that's good, right? Yeah, why not? Yeah. Everybody's happy. Everybody wins, especially the Kubernetes consultants.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope that that's a model that people who are running closed source programs take into heart going forward, is that when the community puts pressure on you to fix something, or that they found an escalation bug that they need to fix, this proper solution is not to sweep it under the rug for 4 months while you craft a proper response through your marketing department. It's to get the patch out, take your black eye, put some frozen peas on it, and move on.
Mm-hmm. I think the response to anything like this is bigger than the actual flaw that comes up.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I hope you have your cryptocurrency news up next, because we've got a big one for you. Nvidia released an Nvidia card. Nvidia has the Titan card now equipped with their Turing architecture, and the newest one is called the Titan RTX. Big news. It's got increased tensor performance compared to the consumer-focused RTX 2080 Ti, which I have 7 of sitting in my PC now. Raw tensor performance has increased over 200% to 130 teraflops. That's a lot of flopping. That's largely because NVIDIA caps its GeForce cards on the FP32 accumulation throughput, which, if you know what that means, you're smarter than me. Combined with 24 gigs of VRAM, this should make for a very interesting value proposition for data scientists or ray tracing content creators, or if you're still trying to get Crysis to run on your PC. However, this top-end card is not cheap. It's $2,500 for one video card. But you know what? That's actually a $500 price cut from last year's Titan 5. Ken, we're starting to see a huge market for high-performance computing clusters that are using cards like this to do some crazy offload GPU-enabled compute. Even Amazon is starting to get into this by offering GPU clustering and things like that. Are we going to see the bifurcation of the video card market, where the consumer guys are going to have their own stuff that runs, things like Crysis and cryptocurrency mining, and then the high performance people are just going to have some crazy ludicrous cards like this?
I mean, that's kind of existed for a while. There used to be two segments of the video card market back when the other segment was, the engineers drawing in CAD or whatever. I mean,
Mhm.
this was just a good way for folks to or for NVIDIA to remind folks that they do more than just gaming and cryptocurrency mining with their products. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a data scientist or developer who knows how to effectively use all the power in these kinds of GPUs, but I know they exist, and the use cases that tend to make this investment worthwhile for those who actually know how to put this kind of product to use. And since you mentioned, we've been talking about it, cryptocurrency value has been going downhill recently. It's a good time to remind folks that these use cases exist and that NVIDIA is still the king of GPU hill.
Yeah, exactly. This Nvidia has always been the card that people are programmed against because of the CUDA cores and things like that. And I think that seeing the transformation of the market from people who do CAD versus people who play Doom to now people who are mining cryptocurrency versus ones who are doing complex computational offload computing of cloud focused machine learning something or other is kind of interesting. But I think that one of the reasons why you're going to see this stay the way that it is right now is because nobody in their right mind is going to pay $2,500 for a video card that can't mine Bitcoin. All right. Windows news. I love Windows. As I say this recording on my Mac. Brad Sams from the Petrie IT Knowledge Base reports on the status of Windows 10 Lite, which is a potential Chromebook OS competitor. Now, Chromebooks have become a huge thing, especially in education, and everybody wants them some of that sweet, sweet market share. Right now, the OS barely recognizes or is barely recognizable as Windows, focusing more instead on running progressive web apps in the universal Windows platform. And really, that's about it. The goal is to make a super lightweight, instant on, and CPU architecture agnostic operating system. Where have I heard this before? Given it will use a new UI, Microsoft is still debating whether or not they actually want to call this thing Windows. Wow, that's a big shift. This OS may be announced as early as build 2019 next year. Now, here's the question that I've got for you, Ken. We lived through the Windows RT debacle when it's like, hey, let's run Windows on ARM into the ground. But does this mean that Microsoft is going to make themselves a credible competitor to Chrome OS?
They're going to have to make it as easy and cheap as Chrome OS for that to work. That's the big reason it's so huge. They're so huge in education because you can buy a bunch of them cheap. You can deploy them easily. You can administer them easily. If one gets broken, lost, or damaged or whatever, it's not a huge deal. So having an operating system that delivers the kind of experience you're talking about is only part of the equation there. It's also worth mentioning probably the second biggest segment for a Chromebook is your family member that you want to get off of Windows because they keep falling for the hello, this is Microsoft support phone scam, and you just want to give them something that they can't break and they can't get exploited on. So hopefully those won't exist. Microsoft has been kind of trying to do something like this recently with Windows 10s, but it's not quite the same product. It's basically just a lockdown version of Windows that you can only store apps from the App Store on. It's supposed to deliver a more controllable, less vulnerable experience, I guess you could say. Anybody who understands what that is basically turns it off as soon as they get it so they can install Chrome.
Yeah, I think that in order for Microsoft to really compete in this market, they're going to have to give it away. And they're going to have to let the manufacturers have more or less complete control over it. And they're going to have to hope that people want a slightly less powered Windows compatible device or that someone ports this to ARM because the future for heavyweight Windows OS for students is not looking too bright.
Not only that, they're going to have to make their web apps the center focus of this and make them run well on low-powered hardware. They're probably going to start giving away Office 365 to schools if they aren't already, which I kind of think they are. But the web version of those apps, they're going to have to run on pretty low-powered hardware with a fairly lightweight browser that Microsoft doesn't actually have right now. But we're going to get to that, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because there's another story that came out that involves Microsoft and Google and running things. Microsoft has abandoned plans or has announced plans to abandon their Edge web browser. You've left us too soon. The company plans for a new Windows 10 browser. Surprisingly, it's based on Chromium. that new browser is codenamed Anaheim because Microsoft likes to name things after cities, and unknown if it will move away from the Edge browser branding and UI when they finally release it whenever it's ready. This puts some context on reports that Microsoft was committing code to the Chromium open source project to help it run on ARM. Generally, those kinds of things are the ones that run in advance of what you're doing. Now, are we surprised in any way that Microsoft is no longer living on the edge?
I'm not. It's a browser that seemed doomed from the day it was released. It's supposed to be fast, and I guess it is, but it lacks so much functionality and is so unstable that nobody wanted to use it, really. Nobody wants to run more than one browser either. So even if there are apps that worked better in Edge, I never met anybody who would consciously choose to keep a separate browser window open just for the apps that they knew would run better in that browser. We'll see what the future holds with this other browser based on Chromium. But I don't know many people that are sad to see Edge go and that we're really waving the flag or whatever for the browser.
Now, as our editor-in-chief and fearless leader, Rich Stoffolino, points out, this is rumored, not announced. They probably didn't want to upset the 5 Edge users they actually have. And I know this because I accidentally launched Edge on my Windows 10 PC the other day and spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how to stop it. But yeah, the funny fact is that almost everything that is a competitive browser now is based on Chromium at some point in its core. I know that Opera is using Chromium, almost is very heavily involved in that project. You've still got Firefox out there. I think they're still making noise, but yeah, pretty much everybody has landed on Chromium as the way forward. So I don't see Edge living much longer, mostly because people weren't even sure it was alive to begin with. So here's to you, Edge. You left us way later than we thought you were going to. All right, so it's time for one of our favorite segments here on the Gestalt IT Rundown. It's a big deal or no big deal, and this is going to be involved with news from Microsoft Connect. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the rules of the game, I'm going to read off a story, and then Ken is going to tell us whether or not that is a big deal or it's not a big deal. All right, get your lightning round buzzers ready to go. It's time for big deal or no big deal. All right, starting for the first piece of news from MS Connect, Microsoft has announced that they are boosting their rural broadband initiative to reach about another million people, originally announced last year, with plans to reach 2 million people. They're hoping to get to 3 by 2022, and they've added California, Indiana, Mississippi, West Virginia, and my wonderful home state, Oklahoma, to the program. Microsoft is using white space spectrum to roll out this broadband service. Ken, is this a big deal or is this not really a big deal?
Well, they're also in my area, and for the folks that I know in rural areas that are very underserved by broadband, including my in-laws, who I cannot get decent internet access when I visit them to save my life, for them, it's a big deal. I like it.
All right. Anything that gets us all connected is a big deal. So I think that's going to be great. How about some user experience news? Microsoft announced they are releasing the Windows Presentation Foundation, Windows Forms, and Windows UI XAML library, which you may know as WinUI, under open source licenses on GitHub. They're finally putting that thing to use. This is a big deal for upcoming .NET Core 3.0, as it will support those frameworks, including Universal Windows Platform controls and apps using them. A preview of .NET Core 3.0 was released earlier this week, and it looks like Satya is going crazy with the stuff in the house. He's releasing it all. Is this a big deal that Windows is open sourcing UI frameworks?
I'm skeptical on that one. I think it's great that MS is courting developers more often and open sourcing things. I'm not sure if a lot of them are excited to work on the UI. I think we've already touched on this. Almost everything happens in the browser these days. So everybody's developing apps in the browser. So get me the UI that gets me the browser, and I develop in there, and that's what I care about. I think is going to be the response from most developers. So.
Yeah, I don't think this is as big a deal as people are making it out to be. I think you're going to end up having a little less focus on this and on other news. All right, we talked about Kubernetes earlier. Let's talk about some Docker. Microsoft and Docker announced the Cloud Native Application Bundle, an open source project related to cloud native app lifecycle management. Microsoft released a reference client called Duffel, which can handle install, upgrade, and uninstall apps, as well as creating new CNAB bundles with secure signing. Docker is working on integrating CNAB into their existing tools. Microsoft is hoping that this standard sees adoptions as a vendor-neutral solution. Big deal that Microsoft and Docker are making a cloud-native application bundle.
No. It may be a big deal if there weren't this pesky little thing called Kubernetes, but unless you're an enterprise that for some reason thinks Kubernetes is too hard, like we mentioned earlier, and you don't want to try that, but you want to somehow develop cloud native apps, you're probably not going to look at this.
Yeah, I agree. I think the enterprise voted and Kubernetes won. Docker has been voted off the island. All right, Microsoft announced real-time subtitles and captions is rolling out to Skype and coming soon to everybody's favorite PowerPoint in 2019. The AI-powered text will auto-scroll throughout a call, although there are plans to make this available in a separate pane as well. Skype translation can now also read subtitles in different languages with support for 20 languages coming by the end of the year. Is this a big deal that Microsoft is now real-time translating Skype calls?
I think so, yes. They also mentioned that they're going to offer real-time captions for PowerPoint as well, which left me a little confused. So I guess somebody's going to be presenting and they're going to have a microphone and it's going to translate on the PowerPoint deck. I don't know. But for Skype, I think it's cool. Anything to help basically deliver the service to, disabled people or somebody who just doesn't want to turn their phone up so they don't have to wake their baby. Either way, it's pretty cool. Pretty big deal.
Yeah, I agree. And any ability to get real-time captioning going on would be a huge boon for people that do transcription for podcasts or videos or things like that, because that increases your searchability. So for those of you out there who are thinking about starting a podcast and use Skype, this is a great way to make your show notes.
And I think it's great that we finally see basically AI has developed to the point where this is a reliable service that people will use.
Yeah.
If you've used ready speech recognition in the past, you've had so-so results. I think it's much improved in recent years.
Yeah. Dragon Dictate represent. All right. Azure Pipelines extension for Microsoft Visual Studio Code will enable developers to use Visual Studio syntax highlighting that is aware of Azure Pipelines in the YAML format. Big deal? No big deal.
Big-ish. If you're paying attention, AWS announced enhancements to many IDEs, including VS Code for AWS last week. Well, now Azure is doing it for VS Code as well, but they didn't mention other IDEs. Well, for everybody who loves VS Code, there's more reason now to use Azure versus AWS. So sure, big-ish.
Big-ish deal. Well, we'll count that. ServiceNow integration for Azure Pipelines. Big deal, no big deal.
Kind of big deal. Yeah, a lot of enterprises are adopting both ServiceNow and Azure. Anything that reduces friction between the two platforms is not only good, kind of necessary.
Yeah, and I believe that ServiceNow, the only thing they still don't integrate with is My Fridge, although I hear that's coming next week. Azure Machine Learning Service is now generally available. This lets you build, train, and deploy machine learning models on Microsoft's cloud. Big deal, no big deal.
Yes, big deal. If you're going to have a cloud service, you need to have machine learning services on your cloud.
And I believe this is also a combating move against AWS releasing a lot of their machine learning software and training for free for people to run on AWS. So this is probably them holding off the massive migration to figuring out how to run machine learning stuff on AWS.
Yes, they need it to be able to compete. Absolutely.
All right. And lastly, Visual Studio 2019 Preview is now available for Windows and Macintosh. It features IntelliCode for AI-assisted IntelliSense, smarter debugging, live share real-time collaboration, GitHub pull request features. In Visual Studio 2019, wow. Also has very deep integration with Azure for container and serverless computing. Is 2019's Visual Studio Edition a big deal or not a big deal?
Not a big deal. They're releasing a lot of features that are good, that are necessary, but this is kind of what you would expect from the latest release for Visual Studio. It's par for the course. It's good, but it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, I know that people who programmed in Microsoft flavored programming languages still use Visual Studio, but I believe that Notepad is the second largest IDE out there. So I don't know. This has potential for people, especially if you're not comfortable with semicolons and squiggly brackets, but I think that's probably about it. Everybody else is going to be doing something by hand.
Pretty much. I agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ken, for playing our big deal, no big deal. We will.
What did I win?
The home game, which we will have shipped to your house eventually by third-class mail. All right. Well, thank you, audience, for joining in. We would give you the home game version of this, but unfortunately, I'm going to have to go make it later, so orders might be delayed. Check my Etsy page later. That's going to do it for this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember, if you missed any of this episode or you didn't find the ninjas running around in the background during International Ninja Day, Full episodes of this podcast, as well as every other episode we've recorded, will be available on the Gestalt IT Facebook page. Please make sure you give us a like over there. You can also head over to our Gestalt IT YouTube page, where you can see playlists of not only this, but all the other things we do with Gestalt IT. And now we have a special audio podcast format. Yes, for those of you out there that would like to listen to us when you're mowing the lawn or driving to work, you can check out every episode of the Rundown in our podcast feed. Just make sure you search for the Gestalt IT Rundown in your podcast application of choice, and make sure that you subscribe to us so you'll always get the latest episodes as soon as we publish them on Wednesdays. Remember that you can catch us live every Wednesday here on Facebook at 12:30 Eastern. We will be recording new episodes as often as we can, unless it's Christmas, in which case we'll be all at home, probably enjoying a little too much eggnog. For more great content, Ken, where can people check out some of the stuff that you're doing?
Not only on gestaltit.com, but also you can find me on my personal Twitter at Ken Nalbone, or my blog, fullstackkengineer.com.
Thank you very much, Ken. And for those of you who want to follow along with some of the stuff that I do, you can find a lot of it at gestaltit.com, but you can also head over to networkingnerd.net, as well as my Twitter handle at networkingnerd, where we will be celebrating National Bath Party Day later this evening, but there will be no pictures. I'm sorry. All right. For more great IT content, your home should be gestaltit.com. Make it your homepage, and you will never be left out of all the great stuff that's going on. But for Ken Nalbone, Tom Hollingsworth, and the rest of the Gestalt IT crew, I want to wish you all a super sparkly day. Bye-bye now.